Hi, thanks for being with me today. I'm Jeff Stark. If a counselor has counseled men, husbands, and sometimes their wives in the course of counseling, it may be marital counseling, and in the course of marriage counseling, the issues of sex are not infrequently coming up. They frequently come up as a problem. Then it's not unusual for a counselor to hear a man say these two things. Number one, he says, I don't know why my wife is so upset about my looking at pornography a few times a week. It's not hurting anybody. It's innocent. Um, we can't agree on frequency, so we do our thing. But then, in addition to that, I may satisfy myself. And so, I'm not having an adulteress. There's nothing emotional going on. So why is she so upset about this? I don't understand. Secondly, he may say, I'm walking in the mall and I happen to notice women walking by us, and my wife complains to me bitterly that she does not want me looking at other women. And I don't know how I can go to the mall or the supermarket or church, even church, without seeing and looking at other women. Yet it seems to me as though the bar that she is setting for me to be making her happy is I don't see any other women. I'm not looking at other women. So that's really frustrating. I don't know how to handle that. I mean, he says to the counselor, "What do we do in this situation?" So let me address those two issues here right now because they frequently come up and they're important issues, and I think the scriptures give us some helpful advice as we think about those two matters as it comes to husbands and wives and sexual issues in the context of marriage. So first of all, when you talk to the husband or wife about the husband looking at other women, if the wife was in the counseling office and she hears this, she's more than likely frequently going to be saying in that kind of a context, my husband doesn't simply see and look at other women. I can tell that he is staring, he is following with his eyes, and I can see by virtue of his eyes, and I know him, I know that he is mentally undressing that woman as he is only looking at that particular wife. I see his eyes go from his head to the breasts. I see the eyes go to the breast to the hips. I see him turning his head. I see him turning his head that way. And so when my husband says that he's just looking at women, I don't have a problem with him looking at women. It's impossible. But he's not looking. He's staring, he's following, and he is mentally undressing them because he's not simply looking at them. He's looking at their sexual parts, as in breasts. And so that's an object of discussion that has to take place between a husband and wife. Let's address that briefly right now, if I can. So let me address it on the part of the wife and also in terms of the husband. In Matthew chapter 5, I discovered something once again I'd forgotten a long time ago that I had seen but had forgotten. And it says Jesus is talking a Sermon on the Mount. And it talks about Jesus reinterpreting, properly interpreting for his readers, what does it mean for a man to commit adultery? And it says, you've heard that it was said, do not commit adultery. And what Jesus is referring to is the Old Testament commandment, do not commit adultery. And the Pharisees and others were thinking, as long as I didn't jump in the sack and have intercourse with another woman, I could do anything else sexually. But I must not commit adultery, but anything short of that would be fine. They had the wrong understanding of that. Jesus is going to give a much broader interpretation. God's original interpretation of that is not only what I do with my eyes and my mind and my body and my genitalia, but it also has to do, the commandment has to do with what the condition of a person's heart. So he says this, but I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. All right, so I take two things away from this. Number one is I would say to the woman, and both of them actually, I'd say, look, let's be realistic here and let's see if we can all get on the same page about this. Jesus says here, it's not adultery for a man to look at a woman. It's not adultery for a man to look at a woman. As a matter of fact, it's impossible not to see and look at other women. You're crisscrossing with them in the supermarket, in the Walmart, and the video store, the gym, in church, and dozens of other places. Men and women are going to be crisscrossing with them. Some degree of those women are going to be attractive to the husband. And so he's so looking, seeing, observing, and looking at that particular woman is not a sinful thing. But it becomes sinful if that looking bleeds over in terms of in the man's mind and in the man's heart, that he does lust after her. Listen to this again. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So there's a physical adultery, that's having sex with another woman, if you're a husband. But there's a mental and a heart adultery that we're told that we must avoid at all costs. And that's usually what a wife is upset at when she observes her husband in her mind, knowing him well, that he's not just looking, but he's lusting after her as he watches the eyes go up and down, and as he follows a woman who may be very attractive, then she knows something more is going on than that's just a pretty lady over there. But wives, I would say there are 20% of the population is going to be attractive to your husband. That's a lot of women. And you cannot prevent that intersection. He's going to crisscross with other women, and there's nothing wrong with looking at a woman and finding her attractive. Hopefully he finds you attractive. He's committed to you, more importantly, but he'll find you attractive, I hope. But there are going to be 20% of the population out there that he's going to find attractive. If he sees and looks at that woman, finds her attractive, that's not sinful. However, I would turn to the man. And so you must give some leeway there in terms of what your husband's doing in terms of looking. Looking and seeing is unavoidable. If you don't want your husband looking at other men, literally, you have to keep him locked up in the basement. Okay, but you're not going to do that, and God doesn't want that to happen. But I would turn to the man and I would say, look, when you look and you find a woman, and if she is attractive, there's nothing wrong for a second to say that there's a woman and she's an attractive woman. But then what happens in your heart is what you have to have control over. And God tells us in this passage, the commandment says, we must not go beyond looking and finding attractive to lusting in her in my heart. And that has to do with my eyes, and it has to do with my mind, it has to do with my heart. And so I see someone who's attractive, but then in my mind and my heart, I do not allow myself to turn that into lust and imagination, and mentally and undressing her and physically undressing and staring and so forth and on. But that's a condition of the heart. And men, we're not permitted to do that. God does not want us to do that. He wants us to draw the line in the sand. Looking's okay, but when you mentally undress her with your eyes and otherwise, and with your mind and with your heart, then you are committing. Look, what's Jesus say? He says you're committing adultery already. You haven't jumped in the sack with that woman, but if you've done that, you've already committed adultery, he said. Listen to that. He says, but I tell you, if anyone looks at a woman lustfully, has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And so, men, we need to prayerfully ask God to help us and to learn how to discipline ourselves and develop the skill of not looking, but if I do look and I find someone attractive, that I quickly turn my eyes and I watch over my eyes and my heart, and I turn away from that, and I don't lust with her in my heart. So the wife has to give you leeway to be crisscrossing with women that you might find attractive, but you need to be faithful to her and to God as you watch what goes on in your heart after that first second that you found that person attractive. So here's how this played out this morning. I'm thinking about these things, of course, in the course of this morning and yesterday and otherwise, and thinking about what to say about these matters. And I was on my iPad this morning, and I was looking through YouTube, and I was scrolling down through YouTube, and I happened to see an advertisement of a lady, an attractive lady who was in a bathing suit. And with these things in mind, I looked at her. I found her attractive, but then I said to myself, move on, Jeff, because I don't want that look to turn into lust in my own heart. And so what I did was, as I moved on, I built a wall there, and I was not going to go back and look, and I was not going to go back and lust with her. I saw her, I found her attractive, I moved on, and I did not allow myself, I had the discipline to not allow myself to think about her in any other terms. I forgot about her. I saw her for 1 second, I moved on for 1 second, and I did not come back for another second in terms of thinking about her, looking at her, and then lusting with her in my heart. That was a success this morning. I was glad to be able to do that. That's the kind of thing that God wants us to do on a regular basis. Look, let's be very, very honest. This is very hard, and it's very challenging. It's challenging because we live in Sodom and Gomorrah, and men are assaulted every day with dozens of occasions, innocently as they crisscross of looking at attractive women who are scantily clothed. But there are hundreds of occasions and opportunities for him to seek that out as well. And so we live in Sodom and Gomorrah, and those are the challenges that face us as men and face wives, your husbands, every single day, and there's nothing we can do to stop that. He is going to look, see, find a woman attractive. But men, here's where it gets difficult. What you have to do is have the personal conviction and the faith and the self-control to draw the line there. I see her, she's attractive, but I jump over a fence and I move on with my thoughts and with my eyes and with my heart, and I don't go back and lust in my own heart, because that would be that's not a fault. God would constitute that as mental adultery if we're lusting after a woman in our heart whom we might happen to find attractive in the supermarket, for example. Okay? So I hope that's helpful to wives and husbands. That's a very common situation that comes up. And so the husband needs to demonstrate to his wife, whom he may have created great insecurity in her because he has looked, he has stared, his eyes are moving this way and that way, but he gets defensive when the wife says, "What are you doing?" And he gets defensive, annoyed, and angry, and he says nothing when something really is happening. You're not fooling her. You're hurting her. And that goes back to our first video here, and why is my wife so angry at my pornography? Your wife wants you to look at her that way and not another woman. Lustfully, attractively, desirably, passionately. Your eyes are to be going to her in that way and not going to another woman in any other situation. And she wants you to look at her that way, and she does not want you to look at other women that way, and that's why she's pissed. Because she's watching what you're watching. And she's watching what you're watching because she can't trust you. And when she sees you do that, it's extremely hurtful to her, and it causes her to be very insecure in terms of your commitment to her, the priority of her, the exclusivity of what should be going on with your eyes and your heart with her. And all those things are jeopardized when she sees you looking and lusting at other women. In the movie theater, in the supermarket, and at church, okay? She sees you and watches you, and a woman shouldn't have to do that. But you've created her to do that because probably you have looked, you have lusted, she's noticed that, she's probably talked to you about it many times. You've pushed it off, you've denied it, you've lied about it, or you've pushed it back on her, telling her it's her problem and not yours, all the while creating, and here you are in the counselor's office trying to iron this matter out. I hope that's helpful. That's going into a lot more detail than I intended to in this video number 2 of why is my wife so angry at me and my porn. But we're adding to what we talked about in our first video about the fact that she's really pissed at you because she does not want you to be looking or thinking about another woman in naked terms, but simply and only her. Thanks for being with me today.